Hello, Year Nines. I hope you're well. Today's Loom lesson takes us to ecosystems and our learning question, introducing a small scale ecosystem and understanding how they are affected by change. Now, please make sure you've got a pen, pencil, and some paper to work on. Let's go to full screen. So, what are we learning about? As I've said, small scale ecosystems. You'll probably remember about a month or so ago, the 2-week work on class charts moved on to look at both small scale and large scale ecosystems. What we're going to do today is focus on the first half of that, so the small scale ecosystems, and next week we will move on to look at the large scale ones. I do apologise for the fact that there is no musical introduction today, but I couldn't think of something suitable for small scale ecosystems. Given the size of biomes around the world or large scale ecosystems, hopefully I will get much more inspiration for next week. Who knows, we might even be blessing the rains down in Africa. But if you can think of something even better than that, please do email me and I will be open to suggestions. Okay, so what's in it for you today? Well, it's a great opportunity to either cement your knowledge of the topic or to improve it to a solid standard. Hopefully, by going through things in this way, we will come up with things that you hadn't perhaps fully understood, or come up with things and different ways of explaining things that make it easier for you. So by running through this part of the 2-week learning pack, explaining it, hopefully you will all get something really valuable from this lesson. What we'll then do is complete a quiz to test your understanding, and that will be this Loom for this week done. Okay, right, what I would suggest, there's quite a lot to cover. I'm going to rattle through this at a reasonable speed. Don't be afraid to pause this, to rewind it, just go back over something. If there's something I explain, something you hear that you think is really valuable, make notes. Also, you can add notes to your existing work. So I would suggest perhaps pausing this now and getting that work out if you haven't already done so. Right, so we've got the first page here of the textbook on ecosystems. This page and the following pages are full of keywords, diagrams, and a massive network of different things and so much information, which is one of the reasons why I think it's particularly important to try and simplify it. Now, it does start off with a fairly decent description of what an ecosystem is. However, a simplified explanation is that an ecosystem is a complex network of living and non-living things, which are known as biotic and abiotic components. So biotic means living. Think of bio, usually meaning living creatures. Then abiotic, well, the A meaning the opposite of, so abiotic is non-living things. All of these come together to make an ecosystem, and in a way that ecosystem is kept going, kept the way it is, because of all those things in the ecosystem needing each other. They form a complex network of interdependence. I think that's a really good word. Remember that one. And interdependent ecosystems need everything else in the ecosystem to be able to continue. If they don't have it, then the ecosystem begins to break down and change. Now, as we know, we've got ecosystems all over the world, but we are looking at those in the next Loom video. What the textbook and my online lessons start with are small scale or local ecosystems. Now, a classic example is a woodland, as used in the online lesson, or a pond ecosystem, as you've got shown here in the textbook. Now, what makes it small scale? Well, you've still got all the necessary ingredients that make it an ecosystem. You've got living things, non-living things, food webs in there as well, and there's loads of different things like producers and consumers in the food web. Now, these are all terms I hope you will remember and be getting familiar with, both from that online lesson and also the key terms sheet I asked you to complete to help with your knowledge, your understanding, and your ongoing revision needs. Now, with that ecosystem section covered, let's move on to look at these terms down the side here. I've mentioned producers and consumers. So producers derive their energy from the environment. They are part of an ecosystem which takes its energy from the environment. Plants are the typical ones because they take their energy from the sun with photosynthesis and produce their own food. Consumers, they then eat the producers. Consumers eat producers because producers create food themselves, and the consumers get their fuel by eating the producers. Now, decomposers, they're slightly different. They're bacteria that break down other living material in order to get their own substance, which is pretty cool. Now, a food chain and a food web, these two, now those two together, now you've got to be careful because they can get confused very easily. If we switch to page 53 here, you can see a food chain. We've got a food chain up in the top right-hand corner. And it goes all the way from the bottom to the top. The thing at the bottom produces the food. So where's my little arrow? There we go. That produces the food. Then the next thing up eats that thing at the bottom. But then the thing in the middle, so we've got our great diving beetle, that eats the second thing up, which ate the thing at the bottom, and so on until it goes all the way to the top. In this case, in the local pond ecosystem, it's the heron, a bird which feeds off the fish. The fish feed on the great diving beetles, or lots of other insects to be fair, that's just an example. Then that feeds on the midge larva, which is something that hasn't hatched yet, but would have become an insect. And then these feed on the broken down and decaying leaves, which are the producer in the ecosystem. So that's a chain. But that chain is part of a much bigger food web, where loads of things feed on all sorts of other things. Food webs cover the whole ecosystem of what eats everything else. A food chain only shows you one chain from top to bottom, so remember the difference between these. Now back on page 52, down at the bottom, there's another term here called nutrient cycling. Now this is simply about moving nutrients around in an ecosystem. They might be in the soil. These are the things that animals need to survive and plants need to survive. So they might be in the soil or in the rocks as well. And these are taken up by plants, which are eaten by the animals, which are eaten by other animals. And all of these things decay, and then they decompose back into the soil, and the whole process starts again. It's like nature's recycling system for nutrients, which is a neat way of remembering what it's all about. Now let's go back to page 53. Now we've got a diagram here of a freshwater pond ecosystem. It's great to know a bit about this, but I'm not going to talk you through it as there's just too much going on in this diagram. What I would suggest is Google freshwater pond ecosystem, and you'll find plenty of stuff that will show you examples of a typical UK pond ecosystem that you can look at. So before I turn the page, remember ecosystems are all about loads of living and non-living things, biotic and abiotic components, all living together and needing each other to survive. The question is, as we turn the page, what happens if you change something about one of those parts? Maybe you take a particular animal out of the ecosystem. Maybe you take out one particular plant. Maybe you add another plant and they get out of control. What if you remove something abiotic, something like water, or if you change the way the air works around it, something like pollution? This is what change is in an ecosystem. They can be positive in some ways, they can be negative as well. We classify these as either being physical or natural. So the things that nature does to change an ecosystem, like climate change over a long time, or there are more famous human ones on the other hand. Of course, human changes to an ecosystem can also be massively controversial. So let's talk through the natural ones first. These can be mainly from climate change and drought and weather conditions changing. Not full-on climate change, but just different weather on different days. But most of the time, it's just about human activity. This diagram at the bottom of page 54 shows us an excellent example as to why. Just to mention a few things. So first of all, fertilizers for agriculture. So using too many chemicals and pesticides and things as well when you're growing crops means you're going to change an ecosystem as they're going to get into the soil. It changes what's grown. Farming itself changes an ecosystem, so that's a change. Deforestation. It's a famous one. Cutting down woodland removes a habitat. It removes food sources, it removes oxygen from the air, it removes nutrients from the soil and doesn't put them back. It makes a massive change to ecosystems. Now, this is a great example to remember for answering GCSE exam questions. It's a massive natural change. Ponds being drained or cleared out for some reason, maybe vegetation from around a pond being removed. These are all examples of change in ecosystems. Another one, hedgerows being removed to increase the size of fields. Hedgerows are a really important ecosystem. We've got lots of birds and insects that live in hedgerows and they depend on the hedgerows staying the same. I mean, the main point of all of this is if you remove something from an ecosystem, it doesn't just stop there. This can have a short-term effect on the ecosystem. Let's go with deforestation, for example. You cut down a few trees in an ecosystem, an animal might lose its habitat, like a squirrel that's living in a tree. But long term, you're going to start noticing changes. Different plants might start growing in the area. Different animals might start eating those plants, which could affect the food web in that ecosystem. It might affect the animals that eat those animals. For example, more insects might move there that can eat that plant, and those insects might start eating the other trees in the area and start to spread a really big problem. And this will upset the ecosystem that's there. Birds flock to the area because all the insects need eating, and boom, before you know it, you've massively changed the whole ecosystem just by removing a few trees. So that's how it happens. And the point is, little changes in an ecosystem can have a really big, far-reaching consequence on it. So that's why we care about them so much. Right, now what I would suggest is that you take a little break now before we undertake the quiz, and then we move to the end of this loom. Okay, let's go to the quiz. There's 9 questions. They are multiple choice. Let's start with number 1. What is a community of plants and animals sharing an environment with non-living things known as? Is it an ecosystem, producers, biome, or biotic components? Number 2, living organisms such as plants and animals in an ecosystem are known as what? Is it producers, biotic components, consumers, or abiotic components? Number 3, what are non-living things in ecosystems such as soil and water known as? Is it abiotic components, biotic components, consumers, or producers? Number 4, these break down dead plants and animals. They also break down the waste of other organisms. Are they producers, abiotic components, consumers, or decomposers? Number 5. What shows the flow of energy from producer to tertiary consumer? Is it nutrient cycle, food chain or food web? Number 6. What shows lots of food chains and how they overlap? Is it nutrient cycle, food chain, or food web? Number 7, the transfer of nutrients through an ecosystem is known as what? Is it food chain, nutrient cycle, or food web? Number 8, what type of organisms survive on producers? Is it decomposer, consumer, or producer? Final question, number 9. What type of organism produce their own food, usually by photosynthesis? Is it producer, consumer, or decomposer? How did you do? We'll tune in next week to review the answers and to look at large-scale ecosystems. Thanks for listening in. I hope this has been of use, and I will look forward to broadcasting to you again next week. Take care. Bye for now.